Imagine two people, same age, same education, same job, same city. One feels stuck, like the world is working against him. The other feels like the world is wide open, full of chances waiting to be taken. Same external life, radically different internal life. What's the difference? Not money, not talent, not even luck. It's mindset. We often think growth is about adding things, skills, habits, routines. But personal growth, real growth, often starts by subtracting, removing the old ways of thinking that don't serve us anymore. Most people don't fail because they lack opportunity. They fail because they tell themselves stories that limit what they believe is possible. You can give someone all the right tools and they'll still sabotage themselves if they believe success is only for other people. You can put them in the right environment, but if their inner voice is always saying you're not ready or you're too late, they'll stand still while the world moves. Personal growth begins when you realize that your mindset isn't something fixed at birth. It's not genetic. It's built by what you consume, who you surround yourself with, how you talk to yourself when no one is watching. A powerful mindset doesn't come from motivation videos or a New Year's resolution. It comes from evidence, repeated proof that you can show up, struggle, and still survive. Confidence isn't the absence of doubt. It's the willingness to act despite the doubt. Some people wait to feel ready before they begin, but readiness is a myth. Growth doesn't wait for permission. Look at any person who's grown significantly, and you'll find that they didn't always know what they were doing. They weren't always the smartest in the room, but they kept going. They kept adjusting. They were curious, not certain. Curiosity is an underrated superpower. It makes you ask better questions. It keeps you humble. It replaces the fear of failure with the thrill of learning. The people who grow the most are rarely the loudest. They're not the ones announcing every move. They're often in the background, stacking small wins, quietly expanding what they believe is possible. Because here's the thing, mindset isn't a destination, it's a practice. You can read all the books, listen to all the podcasts, attend all the seminars. But unless you do the boring work, showing up on the days you don't feel like it, being honest about your excuses, confronting your insecurities, it won't change you. Growth is often invisible before it becomes undeniable. It's waking up 15 minutes earlier to journal, even when it feels pointless. It's choosing to respond with patience when your old self would have reacted with anger. It's walking away from shortcuts because you care more about integrity than applause. Over time, those small decisions become your identity, and identity is what shapes your actions long after motivation fades. Some people chase results, others chase process. The ones who grow are the ones who fall in love with the process, even when it's slow, even when no one is watching, even when it doesn't make sense yet, because they know something most people don't. Growth is quiet. Mindset is built in the dark, and everything big starts small. Two people can live the same life on paper and have completely different experiences in reality. One feels overwhelmed, defeated, and stuck. The other sees the same circumstances as challenges, opportunities, and stepping stones. It's not that one is objectively better off. It's that their inner framework, the way they interpret events, is different. That inner framework is mindset, and mindset shapes reality more than any external condition ever could. The problem is that most people think reality is objective, that what happens to you determines how your life feels. But the truth is, what happens to you is only part of the equation. How you interpret what happens, how you respond to it, the meaning you assign to it. These things are far more powerful than the events themselves. There are people who grow up in the hardest environments and still find a way to rise, and there are others who have every resource, every advantage, and still feel like life is unfair. The variable isn't life. It's how they see it. Your beliefs about the world shape how you interact with it. If you believe the world is full of opportunities, you'll look for them. If you believe the world is against you, you'll find proof of that too. It's not that one is right and the other is wrong. It's that your brain is designed to filter information through the lens of your expectations. Psychologists call it confirmation bias. You believe something, and then your mind goes out looking for evidence to support it. So if you walk around believing you're unlucky or not smart enough or too late to change, your brain will collect examples to reinforce that belief. Over time, that belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is why mindset is so powerful. It's not just positive thinking or blind optimism. It's about recognizing the power you have to shape your reality through the stories you tell yourself. If you think you're someone who can't handle stress, you'll act in ways that prove yourself right. But if you believe stress is a sign of growth, you'll learn to move through it instead of avoiding it. The belief changes the behavior, and the behavior changes the outcome. Most people spend more time upgrading their phones than they do upgrading their thinking. They seek hacks, shortcuts, and external tools, hoping that a new job, a new relationship, or a new city will make them feel better. But the problem isn't out there, it's in the way they interpret what's happening to them. You can move across the world and still carry the same limiting beliefs. You can make more money and still feel poor if your mindset is rooted in scarcity. A lot of people think mindset is something you're born with. That some people are just wired to be confident, motivated, or focused, but mindset is learned. It's shaped by your environment, your experiences, and the habits you develop over time. It's not fixed. You can train it, change it, upgrade it, and when you do, the world starts to look different. Not because the world changed, but because you did. There's an old saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. That's more than a motivational quote. It's neuroscience. Your brain operates based on belief. If you believe you can improve, you're more likely to try. If you try, you're more likely to fail and learn, and if you learn, you grow. But if you don't believe growth is possible, you don't even take the first step. That belief becomes a ceiling. You can only rise as high as your mindset allows. Consider two people who get rejected from a job. One says, "I'm not good enough." The other says, "I need to improve my interview skills." One internalizes the rejection as a personal flaw. The other sees it as feedback. Same event, completely different outcomes. Over time, these small differences in interpretation add up to radically different lives. One becomes increasingly fearful of taking risks. The other becomes more skilled and resilient. Mindset isn't about pretending everything is good. It's about choosing how to respond when things aren't. Life will always throw challenges at you: loss, failure, disappointment. You can't control those things, but you can control the meaning you assign to them. Do you see them as signs to stop or signals to keep going? Do you see discomfort as a threat or as part of the process? The answers to those questions determine whether you grow or stay stuck. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. A fixed mindset says, "This is just how I am." A growth mindset says, "This is how I am now, and I can change." That shift opens doors that were previously invisible. When you believe you can grow, failure stops being a dead end. It becomes part of the path. You stop asking, "Am I good at this?" and start asking, "How can I get better?" That question alone can change everything. We often underestimate how much control we have over our internal world. We think mindset is a reaction to circumstances, but in reality, it's a decision. It's a lens you choose to put on each morning. Do you see problems or puzzles? Do you see obstacles or opportunities to develop new skills? That lens doesn't guarantee success, but it radically increases your chances of finding it. A powerful mindset doesn't ignore reality. It reframes it. It doesn't deny pain. It searches for purpose in it. It doesn't expect life to be easy. It expects to grow stronger through difficulty, and that expectation alone changes how you move through life. You become more patient, more curious, more adaptable. You stop being so reactive and start becoming more intentional. People often talk about mindset as if it's some abstract quality, but it's not. It shows up in the little decisions you make every day. How you speak to yourself after a setback, whether you choose to complain or to reflect, whether you run from discomfort or lean into it, these small choices build your mindset like bricks in a wall. Over time, they become the foundation of your personal reality. You can't always choose what happens to you, but you can choose how you interpret it, and that choice is what separates those who grow from those who shrink. It's not about being positive all the time. It's about being responsible for your inner dialogue, because that dialogue determines the actions you take, and those actions shape the outcomes you experience. Most people are looking for a map, but personal growth isn't about having all the answers. It's about believing that you can figure it out. That belief, that mindset, is what keeps you moving when the path isn't clear. It's what turns uncertainty into curiosity instead of fear, and it's what turns everyday challenges into the very fuel for your transformation. Growth often begins in silence, in the quiet moments when you're alone with your thoughts, replaying your day, questioning your reactions, wondering why certain patterns keep repeating. It doesn't begin when someone hands you a formula or when you read a quote that sounds profound. It begins when you start to confront the invisible narrator in your mind, the one who tells you what you can or cannot do, who you are or aren't allowed to be, what's possible and what's out of reach. That narrator is built from the stories you tell yourself, and those stories are often borrowed, outdated, or distorted. We all carry stories. Some we inherit from our families, some we absorb from culture, and others we create after painful moments. Stories like "I'm not good with money," "I always mess things up," "people like me don't succeed," or "if I try and fail, I'll look foolish." These stories don't feel like stories, they feel like facts. But they are not. They are interpretations created to make sense of something we didn't fully understand at the time. Maybe someone criticized you once, and you decided you weren't creative. Maybe you got rejected from something important, and you told yourself you weren't worthy. These interpretations harden into beliefs, and beliefs become behaviors. What's dangerous is how subtle it is. You don't wake up and say, "Today I'm going to limit my potential." It happens in the background. You get an idea and immediately dismiss it. You consider a new opportunity and talk yourself out of it. You compare yourself to someone more successful and shrink a little. Not because they made you feel small, but because your story says you don't measure up. The story doesn't shout, it whispers, and over time you stop challenging it. You start living according to it. Personal growth is not just about adding new skills or reading more books. It's about having the courage to question your internal script. Why do I believe this about myself? Where did this belief come from? Is it even true anymore? When you begin asking those questions, you start peeling back the layers of identity that were formed without your full awareness. You begin to realize that a lot of your limitations are imagined, not because you're weak, but because you've accepted a version of yourself that was formed under pressure, fear, or misunderstanding. Sometimes the most powerful growth happens when you catch yourself in a limiting belief and choose not to act on it. You notice the voice that says you're going to fail, and instead of obeying it, you pause. You look at it, you ask where it came from. That pause is powerful. It creates space between stimulus and response, and in that space, change becomes possible. Most people don't grow because they're trapped in automatic reactions. They feel fear and retreat. They feel doubt and freeze. Growth happens when you interrupt those cycles and respond differently. Many people assume that personal growth should feel good, but the truth is, it often feels uncomfortable. Because questioning your stories requires you to step outside of who you think you are. If you've always believed you're shy and then you put yourself on a stage, your body will resist. Not because you can't do it, but because you're violating the script. That resistance is a sign that you're growing, not that you're failing. Your nervous system might panic, but your potential is expanding. Think of your mindset like a software system. If the code is flawed, the output will be too. You can have all the right tools and still get stuck if your mental code says, "I don't deserve success," or "I'll never change." Upgrading your mindset means debugging those lines of code, finding the ones that cause you to crash and rewriting them. And like any good developer, you have to test new scripts. You try new beliefs, new behaviors, and watch how they perform. You don't need to be certain they'll work. You just need to be curious enough to try. One of the biggest lies people tell themselves is "that's just who I am." It sounds honest, but it's often a defense mechanism. It protects you from the vulnerability of growth, because if you believe you're fixed, you don't have to risk change. You don't have to fail. You don't have to admit that your past self made choices from fear, but that belief keeps you stuck. The truth is, who you are is a story you're telling on repeat. And if you can change the story, you can change the outcome. We tend to protect our identity even when it hurts us. If your story is "I'm a procrastinator," you'll keep putting things off, not because you want to, but because doing otherwise threatens the version of yourself you've grown attached to. If your story is "I'm unlucky," you'll overlook opportunities, dismiss good fortune, and make choices that confirm your bad luck. The mind loves consistency. It seeks proof to support the story, even when that story causes suffering. The work is in breaking that pattern, choosing to act in ways that don't match the old narrative and building a new one through experience. No one else can rewrite your internal story for you. People can encourage you, challenge you, even love you. But if your story is that you're unworthy, you'll reject that love. If your story is that nothing works out for you, you'll ignore signs of progress. The shift has to come from within. You have to become the editor of your own mental script. And that requires awareness, patience, and a willingness to be wrong about who you thought you were. The mind is a meaning-making machine. It doesn't just record events, it interprets them, and sometimes the interpretation is worse than the event. A failure isn't just a failed attempt, it becomes a symbol of inadequacy. A rejection isn't just a no, it becomes proof that you're not good enough. But these meanings aren't fixed. You can go back and reinterpret old events. You can look at your past through a new lens, not to change what happened, but to change what it means. You can decide that the struggle made you stronger, that the rejection was redirection, that the mistake taught you something vital. When you do this, you're not being delusional. You're reclaiming agency over your story. You're refusing to let old pain dictate your current potential. And in that act of reinterpretation, growth takes root. Growth isn't always a dramatic breakthrough. Sometimes it's just noticing the story and gently questioning it, catching the thought that says I can't, and asking, what if I could? Hearing the doubt and responding, maybe, but I'm still going to try. These small moments accumulate. They begin to shift your identity from someone who is stuck to someone who is evolving. It's not about having no limiting beliefs. Everyone has them. The difference is whether you believe them, whether you act on them, whether you allow them to define you. Growth happens when you learn to separate the voice in your head from the truth of who you are. When you realize that the story you've been telling yourself isn't the only version available, and that maybe there's a version where you are capable, deserving, and ready to grow into something new. In a world that glorifies overnight success and sudden transformation, it's easy to believe that growth must be loud, dramatic, and immediate. That if something is going to change your life, you should feel it right away. But real personal growth rarely looks like that. It's not found in bursts of inspiration or breakthrough moments. It's found in the quiet repetition of small choices. It's built slowly, brick by brick, through actions that feel almost insignificant at the time. This is why consistency always beats intensity in the long game of self-improvement. Intensity is exciting. It's starting a new habit with energy and ambition. It's making big declarations, setting high goals, and diving in with everything you've got. But intensity fades. It burns hot, then burns out. What's left after the motivation wears off is where consistency comes in. Consistency isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's the decision to show up even when you don't feel like it. To stay with something long enough that the benefits compound and start to shape your identity. The challenge is that consistency often feels invisible. You go to the gym and don't see results. You meditate and don't feel enlightened. You read books and your life doesn't instantly transform, so you question whether it's working. You wonder if it's worth it. That's the trap, because the value of consistency isn't in any one moment. It's in the accumulation of effort over time. It's in what happens when small actions add up and quietly reshape who you are. Think of it like compound interest. You invest a small amount again and again, and for a while it looks like nothing's happening. But eventually the growth curve steepens, the results begin to accelerate, not because you did something different, but because you stayed the course. Personal development works the same way. The benefits aren't always immediate, but they're real. And they're waiting on the other side of persistence. Most people don't fail because they lack skill. They fail because they give up too soon. They expect change to feel obvious and dramatic. But growth isn't always visible in the moment. It hides behind routine. It disguises itself as boredom. It asks for faith that your efforts are building something even when you can't see it yet. That's what makes consistency hard. It requires belief without constant proof. There's a reason so few people achieve long-term transformation, not because they aren't capable, but because they keep starting over. Every time motivation fades, they look for something new, a new plan. A new system, a new way to shortcut the process, but the truth is, most of the time, they didn't need a better plan. They just needed to keep going, to stay consistent through the part where it feels like nothing is happening. This is where discipline enters. Discipline is doing what needs to be done, especially when it's no longer exciting. It's choosing to show up even when progress is invisible. It's understanding that real growth doesn't reward the fastest start. It rewards the longest commitment. The person who journals once a day for 5 years will gain more insight than someone who writes 10 pages in a fit of inspiration and never picks up the pen again. The person who learns one new thing a day for years will eventually outperform the person who crams knowledge for a week and burns out. Consistency builds momentum. Momentum builds confidence. Confidence builds identity. And identity is where change becomes permanent. When your actions align with who you believe you are, you stop having to force discipline. It becomes part of you. You don't go to the gym to hit a goal. You go because you're someone who takes care of your body. You don't write because you want praise. You write because you're a writer. That identity doesn't come from a single moment. It comes from the repetition of behavior until it becomes who you are. But repetition is boring. It lacks novelty, and in a culture addicted to stimulation, boredom feels like failure. So people abandon what works in search of what's new. They don't give their efforts time to compound. They interrupt the process before the rewards can show up. They plant seeds, water them for a week, and then dig them up to see if they're growing. And when they don't see progress, they assume they've failed. But the failure isn't in the process, it's in the impatience. Consistency also has a way of revealing truth. Anyone can be passionate for a day, but what you're willing to do consistently reveals what you actually value. If you say health is important but never make time to exercise, the issue isn't your schedule, it's your priorities. Your habits tell the story of your life more honestly than your intentions ever will. And changing your life starts with changing those small, repeated actions. It's not glamorous to say that showing up every day matters more than working hard occasionally. But that's how excellence is built, one day at a time, one step at a time. The world sees the outcome, the big win, the viral moment, the success story. But what they don't see are the years of quiet consistency that made it possible. The mornings you didn't hit snooze, the books you read instead of scrolling, the meals you cooked when it would have been easier not to. That invisible discipline is the foundation. Without it, nothing lasts. Consistency also protects you from emotional volatility. When your progress depends on how you feel, you'll be inconsistent. But when you build systems and routines that function regardless of mood, you create stability. That stability gives you space to improve, even when motivation disappears, and motivation will always disappear. That's its nature, temporary, unreliable, but consistency doesn't rely on motivation. It relies on commitment, on a decision you made when you were clear-headed that you honor even when you're not. There's a quiet kind of power in doing the same thing every day. It doesn't feel heroic. It doesn't feel revolutionary. But it is, because every time you choose to honor your process, you're reinforcing the kind of person you want to be. You're voting for your future self, and over time, those votes add up. They become evidence. They become identity. Most people are waiting for the right time to start, or the right feeling, but waiting for the right conditions is how time slips away. The truth is, growth doesn't require perfect conditions. It requires repeated effort under imperfect conditions. It requires showing up tired, unsure, even afraid, and doing the work anyway, not because you're guaranteed success, but because you know who you're trying to become. And you trust that the process done consistently will take you there. It's hard to measure the value of one small habit. One healthy meal doesn't change your body. One workout doesn't build strength. One good conversation doesn't repair a relationship. But over time, repeated consistently, those small acts become transformative. They become the difference between who you are and who you were. They create the shift that intensity never could. When you choose consistency, you're choosing delayed gratification. You're choosing discomfort now for growth later. You're choosing to believe in results that haven't shown up yet. That takes maturity. It takes faith, but most of all, it takes action. Quiet, repeated, sometimes unnoticed, but always meaningful. Confidence is often misunderstood. People think it's loud, visible, and bold. They imagine confident individuals walking into rooms full of certainty, making decisions without hesitation, speaking without fear. But real confidence isn't rooted in certainty. It's not about knowing everything or having the answers ahead of time. Real confidence comes from a willingness to act even when you're unsure. That willingness doesn't grow from being fearless. It grows from curiosity, from a mindset that sees the unknown not as something to avoid, but as something to explore. Curiosity changes the way you experience failure. If you're driven by a need to always be right, failure feels like proof that you're not good enough. But if you're driven by curiosity, failure becomes data. It becomes part of the process. You don't internalize mistakes as personal flaws. You see them as part of learning. This shift in mindset is subtle but powerful, because when you're curious, you're not afraid to try. You're not paralyzed by what could go wrong. You're motivated by what you might discover. Many people wait to feel confident before they act. They wait to feel ready, certain, prepared. But the truth is, those feelings rarely come before action. They follow it. Confidence is not the starting point. It's the result of showing up, experimenting, and surviving the unknown. Curiosity is what gets you through the beginning stages when confidence hasn't formed yet. Curiosity is what allows you to take the first step, not because you're sure it will work, but because you're interested in what might happen if you try. This is where many people get stuck. They equate uncertainty with danger. They see gaps in knowledge as reasons to stop. But curiosity reframes uncertainty as a signal to move forward, not backward. It asks better questions. It doesn't need guarantees. It understands that not knowing is a normal part of growth. You don't need to predict every outcome. You just need to be open to learning. The people who grow the most are often the ones who admit they know the least. They don't pretend to have it figured out. They're just willing to stay in the process longer than most. Confidence that comes from curiosity is more resilient than confidence built on certainty. Certainty can be fragile. When you're sure of something and that certainty is challenged, you crumble. But when you're curious, you adapt. You're flexible. You're not attached to being right. You're committed to getting better. This makes you more coachable, more creative, and more open to feedback. It allows you to course correct quickly because your ego isn't tied to one path or one version of success. Curiosity also removes the pressure to perform. When your only goal is to learn, you stop needing to impress anyone. You stop needing to prove your worth. That freedom unlocks creativity. It allows you to take risks. You're not trying to protect a fragile image of perfection. You're trying to discover what you're capable of. And that makes you dangerous in the best way possible. Not because you're fearless, but because you're willing to keep moving through fear. The problem is that most people confuse curiosity with passivity. They think being curious means waiting around, consuming more information, getting lost in theory. But curiosity is not passive, it's active. It's not just about asking questions. It's about seeking answers through experience. It's about putting yourself in new situations and paying attention to how you respond. It's about experimenting with behaviors, approaches, and ideas. True curiosity demands movement. It asks you to engage with life, not just think about it. Think about children. They're curious by nature. They touch things, taste things, fall down, get back up. They ask why 100 times a day. They don't worry about being wrong. They don't avoid new experiences because they might mess up. They learn fast because they're not afraid of looking silly. Somewhere along the way, adults lose that mindset. They start worrying about image, reputation, and judgment. Curiosity gets replaced by caution. But the people who keep growing are the ones who reconnect with that childlike mindset. They stay playful, they explore, they ask questions without fear of looking foolish in any field: business, art, relationships, health. The people who thrive are usually the ones who stay curious the longest. Not because they're the smartest, but because they never stop asking how things work, how they can improve, what they haven't tried yet. They don't need to dominate every conversation. They don't pretend to know it all. They listen more than they talk, and when they speak, it's thoughtful, because it's coming from a place of inquiry, not ego. Curiosity also allows you to stay present. When you're focused on learning instead of achieving, you're more engaged with the moment. You notice more, you absorb more, you stop rushing through experiences just to get to the next milestone. You start finding meaning in the process itself. This presence creates a deeper sense of fulfillment. It turns everyday experiences into opportunities for insight, and those insights, stacked over time, become wisdom. Another benefit of curiosity is that it protects you from the trap of comparison. When you're focused on what others are doing, it's easy to feel behind. You measure your progress against someone else's highlight reel and wonder if you're doing enough. But when you're curious, your attention shifts inward. You start asking, what can I learn here? What's interesting about this challenge? How can I use this moment to grow? These questions pull you out of comparison and into alignment with your own journey. Curiosity makes failure feel lighter. It removes the sting. When something doesn't work out, the curious mind doesn't spiral into self-doubt. It gets curious about why. It looks for patterns. It adjusts. This mindset transforms setbacks into stepping stones. Instead of viewing failure as the end, you see it as an iteration. Something to study, not something to avoid. That approach increases resilience because you stop fearing the fall. You trust your ability to bounce back and learn. Over time, this practice creates a quiet kind of confidence, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that moves with ease. You become more comfortable with uncertainty, more open to change, more grounded in your own capacity to navigate whatever comes next, and people notice. They see that you're not rattled easily, that you don't pretend to have all the answers, but you ask better questions. That kind of presence is magnetic, not because it's flashy, but because it's real. Confidence built on curiosity also frees you from the illusion of control. You stop needing to know exactly how things will unfold. You start trusting the process. You make plans, but you stay flexible. You set goals, but you allow space for surprises. This makes you more adaptable, and in a world that's constantly changing, adaptability is one of the most valuable traits you can develop. There's a sense of peace that comes from knowing you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to stay open, stay engaged, keep asking, keep learning. That mindset builds a foundation that lasts. It allows you to keep evolving regardless of age, title, or status. It removes the pressure to be perfect and replaces it with the joy of growth. Curiosity doesn't mean everything will be easy, but it does mean you'll be more willing to keep going when things get hard. Because every obstacle becomes a new question, every challenge becomes a new exploration, and that orientation, to see life as something to be explored rather than feared, becomes a source of strength that doesn't wear out. Most people overestimate what they can achieve in a short burst of effort, but underestimate what can be built through quiet, consistent action repeated over time. They look at success as a big event, a sudden breakthrough, a dramatic shift. But what actually creates transformation is much less visible, far less celebrated, and often ignored entirely. It's the small, repeated choices no one sees. The ones you make when no one's watching, when no one's clapping, when no one even knows you're trying. Those choices, repeated over time, build your identity, and identity is what drives long-term change. You don't become disciplined because of one heroic decision. You become disciplined because you chose to wake up early today, and then again tomorrow, and the day after that. No ceremony, no applause, just repetition. You don't become healthy because of one salad or one workout. You become healthy because you made that choice again and again, when it was easier not to. You don't become creative by finishing one project. You become creative by creating something every day, even when it's bad, even when it feels pointless, even when you doubt yourself. These are the choices that shape who you are. Not the loud, public wins, not the big declarations, the quiet, private moments where you decide to do the right thing, the hard thing, the thing that aligns with the person you're trying to become. That's where identity is formed, not in what you achieve, but in what you choose to do consistently. Your habits are a mirror. They reflect what you truly believe about yourself. If you believe you're a disciplined person, you'll act accordingly, but the process works in reverse, too. If you consistently act with discipline, even when you don't feel like it, your brain begins to update its identity. It says, this must be who I am. That's the power of repeated choices. They don't just change your behavior. They change your self-perception, and once your identity shifts, everything else becomes easier. You don't have to fight yourself to do the right thing. It becomes natural. It becomes who you are, but it starts small. Always small, one decision, one action, one moment where you choose intention over impulse, where you choose alignment over convenience. These moments rarely feel significant. They often feel boring. But they are the foundation of everything, because every time you make one of those small choices, you're casting a vote for your future self. You're saying, this is the kind of person I want to be. And enough votes in one direction eventually become a majority. Eventually, the new identity takes hold. The problem is, we're trained to look for results, fast, visible, dramatic results, and when that doesn't happen quickly, we assume our efforts aren't working. We quit too early, not because we can't succeed, but because we haven't yet learned to value the invisible progress, the changes that happen beneath the surface, the shifts in mindset, in character, in self-trust. These changes are harder to measure, but they're what make everything else possible. There's a kind of growth that doesn't show up in photos or metrics. It shows up in the way you talk to yourself when you fail, in the way you respond to stress, in the way you keep promises to yourself. That kind of growth comes only from small, repeated choices, the kind that feel insignificant in the moment, but when stacked, they compound into something powerful. Compounding isn't just a financial concept. It applies to effort, discipline, mindset, skill. Anything you do regularly, no matter how small, will accumulate. The impact might not be visible for weeks, months, or even years. But it's building, quietly, steadily, and one day the results seem sudden to everyone else. But you know the truth. You know they were built slowly, through every decision you made when you could have chosen comfort, distraction, or delay. That's what makes those invisible choices so powerful. They build integrity. Integrity is doing what's right, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one knows, especially when no one knows. When you practice integrity consistently, you begin to trust yourself. You stop needing external validation because you know who you are. That inner trust becomes a superpower. It carries you through doubt, through setbacks, through the moments when nothing seems to be working. Self-trust isn't built through words, it's built through action, through showing up for yourself again and again until it becomes normal, until it becomes your default, not because it's easy, but because you've practiced it. You've made it a part of your identity, and once that's in place, it changes how you move through the world. You make decisions faster. You stop chasing shortcuts. You stop needing to prove yourself. You just live in alignment with who you've decided to be, and that decision is made in the small moments, the quiet moments, the ones no one sees. That's why most people miss it. They think change is loud. They think growth requires dramatic events, but it doesn't. It requires commitment, repetition, awareness. It requires you to choose your future self over your current comfort, one moment at a time. You don't have to overhaul your life in a day. You don't need to become a new person overnight. You just need to start noticing your choices. Are they leading you toward who you want to be, or pulling you away from it? That awareness alone can change your direction. Because once you start noticing, you can start choosing. And once you start choosing, you begin to reclaim your agency. You stop being a passenger in your own life and start becoming the architect of it. Every decision is a chance to reinforce your identity or rewrite it. There's no neutral. Every choice either moves you closer to who you want to be or further away. That can feel overwhelming, but it's also empowering. Because it means you're never stuck. You always have a say. Even if yesterday's choices weren't great, you can make a better one today. That's how identity shifts, not with a declaration, but with a decision. A small one, repeated often. The good news is, the brain loves repetition. It learns by what you do often. So when you act in alignment with your desired identity, even if it feels awkward or forced at first, your brain takes note. It begins to rewire. Habits form, patterns change. What once felt difficult becomes easier. What once felt foreign becomes familiar. Not because you've changed in a single moment, but because you've been changing quietly every day. That's the kind of growth that lasts. It's not flashy, it's not immediate, but it's real, and it's built from the inside out. Built from the choices you make when no one is keeping score. Built from the habits you stick with when no one's watching. Built from the standards you hold yourself to when it would be easier to let them slip. That's where identity lives, not in the outcomes, but in the effort. not in what you achieve, but in what you choose again and again until it becomes your default way of being. And when it does, everything else, your goals, your confidence, your results, starts to shift in response, because the world reflects back to you the story you tell through your actions. And if your actions tell the story of someone who is growing, someone who is disciplined, someone who is building something real, then eventually the world starts to believe it too.